Very good. Thank you for having me, Dr. M.
Gosh, thank you for joining us again. I'm so glad this has become a regular series, and hopefully we can, use it as kind of a state of affairs with Bittensor, and to also, have the world hear you guys out occasionally here and there on deep AI questions.
Absolutely. I love it as a way for us to talk to the community and be interviewed instead of just going one-on-one with a great way for us to disseminate information.
Absolutely.
So I'm really happy that I'm here and everyone else is as well.
Awesome. So let's get started. I want to ask one general questions, and then we'll get into it, all the cool things that are coming up with Bittensor. And for the audience, for an introduction to Bittensor, or what a neural net is, I'll just quickly say that Bittensor is an open source protocol that powers a decentralized and scalable neural net where yes, and that's what Bittensor is, but there is a lot more in terms of what Bittensor is in the first two episodes, and that's where you can listen in. And this is the third episode. So, Const, I'm wondering, what do you what is AGI to you, and do you see Bittensor playing a role?
Well, general intelligence is an interesting term. I think it's thrown around a lot without much knowledge of the specific terms involved. So, there's the artificial aspect, which is obviously pointing towards the fact that we're creating it with computers, and then there's the general aspect, which I'll get to last, and then intelligence. I'm kind of the opinion that intelligence is sort of a universal quality of nature. It's the ability for matter to encode information about its surroundings or another, basically to encode the patterns or the semantics of a lot of noise to pick the signal from the noise. The general aspect is the part which is really undefined, because it sort of implies that there's this large scale generality, like you can generalize this intelligence can solve all problems. But in order to make that claim, you'd have to define all the problems. And there's actually a result in machine learning that says that if you have that it's not possible to encode the solution to all problems, right? Because by the very nature of extracting the signal from the noise, there's an exclusion occurring in what you're picking up in the signal. Right. And so if you were trying if you do one thing, you necessarily exclude the opposite. So there is no like absolute generality to intelligence. And I think what people usually mean is that something along the lines of being able to do what humans can do. Right. It's general in the sense that it can match human intelligence. There's a really great paper called "The Measure of Intelligence" by Francis Collet, where he talks about the various ways in which we define intelligence. The idea of the problem of trying to define intelligence goes back a pretty long way to the field of psychology, and then only just recently became more of a computer science question. And his take is that Francis Collet's take on the entire problem is that general intelligence is the ability to adapt to new tasks which you've not seen before. And so if you can generalize to just tasks in general effectively, and he came up with basically a data set of problems where the machine learning problem that's being solved, there's no data set that the model is allowed to train on. It has to train on data that is completely separate from that task specifically. So general intelligence, in my opinion, is the ability to adapt to a large number of problems. That where that large set becomes general enough, I think is sort of up to us to decide. Is it all of humanity, problems? Can we do
Mm.
everything with computers that we can do as humans? I think that's a pretty good definition. And I think I've said this before on one of your podcasts. When you frame it that way, um, I think a better term is like human obsoleting intelligence. Because if we were to solve all the problems that humans solve, we would essentially be obsoleted. So that's this point that I would say is general artificial intelligence. And then the
Okay.
final part of your question was, do you think Bittensor will be able to approach this? Obviously, we're on the same track as a lot of other companies in the space that are trying to make more and more intelligent systems. But right now, we're working in pretty limited domains. So we're working in just textual understanding with Bittensor, and even with images. The domain against which we're solving AI problems is pretty small, and by design, small so that we can study it. I think we're a little bit far. I think we're pretty far away from AIs truly solving every problem that a human encounters.
Sure. Sure, absolutely. Yes. Yeah, and AGI is something that is thrown around a lot, or even, I think for me, it was only recent that I realized that they even the need to ask someone what they mean by that, by generalized intelligence or AGI when they refer to it. But recently I've seen some expert or not expert, published maybe opinions that we could be as close as 10 years. But it's always something people are fascinated with.
It
So I
really
wanted to
depends.
ask you about it.
It really depends on what the definition is, and that's why I was bringing it up. Sure, we're 5 years away from better AI, unless we can really define what AGI is. We'll never be able to actually verify whether or not those predictions come true in the first place. There's this interesting result from the 60s. They asked people how long until we'll have artificial intelligence, and I believe at that point they didn't have this concept of AGI. It was just AI, and people said 15 years. And then they asked 5 years later, and people said 15 years. And then they asked 5 years after that, and people said 15 years. And it always is 15 years. And I think that has to do with the fact that if you're asking somebody about something that has no definition, you're just going to get some sort of binomial distribution that has a mean. Like a Gaussian distribution, pardon me, with a mean of around 15 years. That's just like the human bias for ill-defined thing with that is technologically advanced. People just say 15 years. So I think that we're probably 15 years away from AGI. Then I'll just go with the mean of humanity.
Sounds good. Very much hopeful to see where Bittensor goes in that time frame. It baffles me every time I think about it. Lots of big things are coming up though, and I want to get into those. Can you maybe tell us a little bit about the Parachain network launch, how it's going? It must be a hectic time for you guys.
It's really exciting time for us as well. Hectic and really exciting. As we come up closer to the release of Finian on Jan 10th, obviously we're going to have an incredible amount to do to really smooth the edges of the technological push that we're going through. So Polkadot is a network of networks that uses the Polkadot relay chain to do merge consensus. So you can move assets across the chains. For instance, you could move Tau to Moonbeam, and then from Moonbeam you can trade and swap, using things like SushiSwap to move Tau into different currencies. So that's going to be really, really, really positive thing for everyone here, especially in terms of liquidity for miners, so that we can really drive the computational side of Bittensor. Like that's our goal here, and always is. It's not about getting marketing or shilling the coin. It's about making sure that our miners are able to afford their compute. And so that's one thing that's going to happen, is we're going to get this liquidity for the token. I think that's really positive. But really, really interestingly, though, the world's our oyster once we get into this ecosystem because developers can build their own smart contracts throughout the Polkadot ecosystem, and host them on other chains and still work with Tau. So, it'll allow people to build things like validator pools, mining pools. All of that kind of functionality is now, at the fingertips of our developers, where it wasn't before. I mean, right now we have a lot of control over what goes on our chain, and um, we've been very cautious about letting people have access to that. But once we get into the Polkadot ecosystem,
Right.
it really becomes the Wild West for what happens outside of our chain. And people can even build their own chains and connect them into Polkadot if they want to use Tau for some other purpose. So that's really interesting thing that we don't really know what people will do. But it really excites us what the potential there.
Yes, Const, am I correct in assuming that this, becoming a dot ecosystem parachain would probably be the biggest publicity that Bittensor has seen so far? Just given that you guys have been, intentionally just low key and not really. I don't see you guys having spent any time really shilling anything for forever. Actually, pretty much.
Yeah, we don't do that, and the reason is that we want people to mine. We don't really want to push the, as you said, shilling side of Bittensor, because we believe that the price will always reflect the computational size of our network, and so we what you focus on, you master, right? And where we put our intentions, that's what we're going to get good at. So that's why we haven't done that. But yes, of course, when we get into Polkadot, there'll be some attention. And interestingly, today I was added into a Telegram group with some other founders in the ecosystem, and they already know about us. So our reputation precedes us in the ecosystem, and I think that it's going to be really interesting once we get into the relay chain. Some of these other communities will be able to interface with us directly. They'll be able to buy and sell Tau, and maybe that will drive them into our community also.
Absolutely, yeah. No, I notice a lot of the questions that people come in and ask on Discord. Many of them are things that are dependent on that, on having being able to do a smart contract, or other times they're just like, hey, I just want an easy way to buy Tau, rather than currently. And I feel like so much of all of that will come, if not at shortly thereafter with the parachain. And of course. I have this feeling now that I've gotten to love Bittensor that, oh my God, the cat is getting out of the bag and it's going to get busy and it's going to get a lot of attention. And
yes,
I have this like a strange feeling about it.
The child is leaving the house.
Exactly.
When we move to that ecosystem, we also lose a hell of a lot of control over the chain, which is good, which is where we want to be, right? The whole concept of decentralized technologies is that it's not just one person that can control it, and so that's our direction, and we this step is like I said, it's our child leaving the house. We're relinquishing control for the betterment of the technology itself. Things that I'm really excited about are the potential for us to build rails into the CLI, where we can do cross-chain transfers and things like that. I mean, wouldn't it be amazing if you could just do BT CLI, transfer or BT CLI swap, and move your Tau in and out of the relay chain into different currencies, potentially then just transfer those other currencies into whatever cloud hosting provider you're using and pay for your compute. Makes really smoothing that market, where in the smoother we can make it, like the less edges in terms of the relationship between the demand for Tau and the price of computing, that's going to really drive the size of the network and make sure that it's expanding to the scale that we want it to expand, so that we can reach up into the realms of hyper computation.
Right. Const, you touch on a personal worry of mine with Bittensor, so I'm going to dig in there just with one question, and that was that I imagine at some point right now, Tau is not out there in exchanges or coin market cap and this and that, but I imagine at some point it will at some level be at the whims of the crypto market, let's say, and I worry that at any point down the line that should it become should mining become an expense that maybe for a while, miners will be able to, some of them, sustain that, but that should that go on for a long period of time, that it would cause the compute in that basically there to be many less GPUs in the network than there are, which wouldn't have an incentive problem, but it would, how much of a worry is this?
I don't see it as too much of a worry. I mean, obviously, we want to focus on making the project successful and valuable, but the bulls and bears are inevitable in any market, and they're healthy.
Right.
The bulls are great because people are partying, and we're expanding resources and we're growing our teams. The bears are where we trim back. It's where we learn how to minimize our costs and do things more efficiently. If we didn't have the bear cycle in Bittensor, I don't think we could make claims like Bittensor is going to be environmentally friendly or computationally efficient. It is the decreases in prices that force people to really think about how they can do things cheaper, and that's this power of markets that we're playing with here. If we didn't take advantage of that, if we were scared of the eventual crash, then we would the technology would not be performing or not be behaving the way that we wanted it to. And the same thing happens in Bitcoin, right? Bitcoin has all these crashes, and it forces the miners to seek out cheaper forms of electricity, different types of compute, FPGAs, ASICs. All these different types of technologies come about because there's a bear market, and that's what's happening in the global cryptocurrency market right now, and people are freaking out. But I think we should really hold strong during these periods, because as everyone knows who's been in crypto for a long time, this is when a lot of things get built. This is when technologies get honed, and then the next batch of ecosystems and technologies and chains and stuff like that, they come out of these bear markets into the bull market.
Absolutely agreed on everything, on all the sentiment you shared about the bear market. Actually, I think it's an amazing time for anyone to be building these days. I would say maybe to go through a build process or even a release or anything of that sort is actually maybe even better to do that in the bear market rather than the bull market, so that you won't have to suffer that kind of a hit to whatever it is you're doing coming from the outer world just shortly after you have gotten up. So that's awesome. A couple of things coming up later. Bittensor is getting a rebranding by Saffron, so that's exciting. Yes. That's coming up mid-December, right?
That's right. We're just going through the patenting process with them to make sure that we have control of the branding that they put out, and we're really excited about it. It looks really beautiful. We put a lot of work into the design, and obviously we're really looking forward to seeing what the community thinks about that. Just to bring the style up to a higher level. The original website, like I made that website, and I'm not a web developer. It's really not that nice. It's quite simple.
It's simple, but that's why I like it.
Yeah, I mean that was the idea behind it. Maybe from necessity more than style. But I think these are the type of things that we want to push in the new year. To do a bit more smoothing of the brand so that people actually trust us. I think it's important.
Absolutely, yeah. Once you learn about Bittensor, it's of course I love the website just because it's Bittensor's website. It doesn't matter to me what it looks like, but I think that's going to be amazing for people having a first glance at the project. A couple of other things that I actually have no idea about. I was going to ask you. That you guys shared with us in TGIFT. For the audience, those are the sessions open to public via Discord that the Bittensor team holds with, really with anyone, but it turns out to be people involved in the project every other Thursday. So that takes place at the same time as this space, but it would be on Bittensor's Discord, and you can get a link to that or join that Discord on the bittensor.com. That's the website. It's on the top right hand corner at the moment. But the second quarter of 2023, you guys mentioned there will be a DAO. I'm wondering what the function of this is. I don't know anything about it at all.
We've talked about this at a couple of TGFTs, but I can go over it again. Absolutely. So the idea for the DAO is to decentralize the movement of some of the hyperparameters in the system. That's the primary reason. We want to make sure that it's not just the foundation that controls the sort of the evolution of the project in the long term. Now we're being very careful about this because we know that there's unless your community is well trained, unless you have like an active um, process for DAO management and governance, DAOs can go very badly, and they actually just get uh,
Right.
basically taken over by a small majority of people with lots of control. But Bittensor has a decentralized mining aspect, right, where anybody can join. It's very open, it's fair, but behind the scenes, the chain has a number of parameters, hyperparameters, which I can talk about on this call because it's something that we do a lot of in behind the scenes. So we tune those hyperparameters, we do analysis on them, and they affect everybody on this. Everybody who's mining. A lot of people on this call, uh, how much computation they need to put on their miners, whether or not they're going to need more VRAM on their GPUs, uh, this type of thing. And we don't want it to be just our control. So the idea for the DAO is to decentralize the ownership, and the voting and the fine tuning of those parameters. We have a lot to discover in that evolution of the project. So initially, the idea for the DAO is to become a shared validator that people can stake to, as a way of funding the project, and accruing sort of ownership that will eventually come into play with via voting rights in the DAO. So V1 is not going to be people here can vote on hyperparameter changes. That's just going to be more of a dialogue with the community in our GitHub to begin, because it's going to take time
Sure.
for us to build out that organizational structure, and then let the system go.
Mm.
So Q2 Q3 will be a staking contract where people are allowed to put tau, and they'll get some proportion of the emission from that without having to run a validator. And this will allow people that are just holding tau, but don't want to run validators to make some revenue at the same time, funding more development from the machine learning side on the foundation.
All right, I see, I see. Yes, the hyperparameter changes, is that this is something that happens on a regular basis, and is this sort of the fine tuning or the adjustment of the network that becomes necessary because because it's an ever changing, ever shifting network. Is this something that is ongoing, and maybe tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure, we have a whole bunch of parameters on the chain that determine various qualities of the mechanism, from registration to how the validators are generally behaving in the network. One example on the registration side would be the immunity period, which is there's a lot of conversation right now in the Discord about how long does a miner have before it essentially gets judged by the network and is pushed out of the mining system. So that's sitting at 3,096. I believe it's 3,096 blocks,
That's right.
which yeah. So it's about it's a few
10
hours. It's
hours,
like yeah, it's
10.24,
6 hours,
yeah.
10.24 hours. It's not
Now
very
it is.
long,
Yeah.
um, and we need to fine tune that parameter so that miners are fairly being evaluated as they come into the system. So if it's too short, then miners will be kicked out before the validators can truly do an analysis on them. If it's too long, then you begin to just kick out peers that were properly situated in the network, and are being kicked out unfairly by these new registers, simply because they have immunity and the old ones don't. So what we monitor is something like what we monitor is the churn. So how many new keys are being added to the system, and we also measure how quickly the peers are attaining incentive over time. And that tells us whether or not we want to increase or decrease. And we try to move these as slowly as possible, because we're manipulating a market that needs to come into equilibrium before we can really understand what the effects are. This is what makes it very difficult. And it's the same thing in general machine learning. In general machine learning, you have hyperparameters of your neural network, the learning rate or the momentum, and you can tweak them over time to affect the learning process of the system. So what's really interesting, I think, about the job that we have at the foundation is we're doing meta machine learning. We're doing machine learning at the level of many decentralized AIs, and also a community of people. We're all in this adaptive system together. It makes it very difficult, but also a fascinating problem to pick these hyperparameters properly. It's a lot of data analysis. It's a lot of classic machine learning work, but applied to hyperparameters of an economic system rather than just an AI.
Right. Yeah, I was speaking with my dad about this over dinner the other night, and I was just telling him, it was about this latest adjustment that you guys did, and I was just telling my dad it must be such a headache at times to deal with this because it is going to, it is ongoing changes that are going to be necessary in order to keep things functioning as intended, I suppose. Does that get to be a headache?
I believe we're very aware that it's a headache for the miners in the system, and so we've really woken up to that fact lately. We made a couple changes recently, which were premature, and we've come to really realize that we have to behave a little bit like a central bank almost behaves with respect to these hyperparameters. In the case of the central bank, obviously you're changing things like interest rates. They give plenty of notice beforehand about the change, and in which direction things will move and what the probability of those changes, and they happen at exactly the moment that they're planned to be taking place. So it's a headache for everyone, really, that these things change. But it's part of the mechanisms that we have to really fine tune the system. So as we check, we see, okay, what kind of models are people running? Is there diversity? Are the validators learning properly? Is there churn in the network? As we fine tune these, we hope to push the system towards a much more performant machine learning system. And
Awesome.
eventually down the road, it's possible that as we come to understand these hyperparameters more and more, we can make them automatic. We don't have to optimize them ourselves, and perhaps there's even an AI problem in there, a meta AI problem.
Right.
Sometimes it feels like it's turtles all the way down with adaptive systems, and I think that as a project we situate ourselves as the highest meta machine learning in the world. We're training in markets which then machines are adapting underneath, and I think no one else is doing that. So we want to understand this plane before we jump up to a more abstract one.
Sure, sure. Yeah, absolutely. No, but for the record, when I was talking about the headache, I meant for you guys, in the sense that, well, sure, I mean, the things, changes manifest on the mining side, and then the team becomes aware of it. What I was mainly talking about, the headache of being in a position of the people who have to make that adjustment, and also with the difficulty that, it needs to be just right, not too much and not too little. And it's, so, was mainly, saying that
Yeah.
you guys are doing such a complicated job there.
On that, we try to focus on core metrics that the system needs to succeed. So and that maybe puts us at odds with some of the people that are mining, because miners might want the system to just become easier, but
Sure.
we want it to become more efficient. And so what the highest level of the foundation, the team that I think directs everything below it, is our Cortex team, which is responsible for doing machine learning work on top of Bittensor. Right, the system really requires clients, and those clients will only be impressed if they can do standard machine learning, if they can actually pull something out of the system. So we see what problems they have, and then that advises the Synapse team, our team that's responsible for fine tuning these parameters, and and it's all with the intention of increasing the performance of these clients. We want to push models that are state of the art, and so I mean, some of the people on this call, may be interested to hear that. Like, it's not so much about can we make it so easy for the miners? Sorry to say, it's more about, can we make sure that the system is actually pushing the state of the art in terms of artificial intelligence and machine learning work. And that means, yes, we need larger sequence lengths. It means, yes, we need to push people to have GPUs. It means that people need to increase their bandwidths. And that all, it comes in relationship to us allowing for our miners to have liquidity in Polkadot, right? If people can sell their DAO and there's liquidity to upgrade their infrastructure, then we can reasonably expect people to improve their mining rigs underneath the mechanism.
Absolutely, yes, yes. I noticed just having barely, touching really scratching the surface of mining in 1 month in, but noticing that there is shortages of GPUs and all sorts of things in the realm of GPUs, whether it's cloud or bare metals. It's just hard to even get devices sometimes these days. And on the mining side, it's interesting, because the very thing that a miner like myself might complain about is actually the very thing that's going to drive Bittensor to get more intelligent faster than it would otherwise. So Bittensor mining is definitely not about sitting back and relaxing or convenience.
No.
But I think hopefully we all understand it, because otherwise it just wouldn't go anywhere.
We'll be praying for bear markets at a certain point, so the difficulty drops. The network problem is this continually it's continually getting more and more difficult by design, and that really weeds out hyper competitive people. I might also add, though, you said this thing about GPUs not being available. I think that it's one of our features at Bittensor that the miners can come up with creative ways of answering these queries without having GPUs. If you can provide useful information without having a GPU, that's fantastic. That's what we want to stimulate, that type of innovation. So the fact that we're pulling up all these resources and we're finding that there's some limitations and they're expensive, I hope that what that eventually does is drive people to be creative in the way that they solve the generation problem that their validators are asking peers to do.
Absolutely, kind of along the same lines as bear market and lowering costs. Const, have you ever thought about an ASIC for Bittensor? Is it even like a feasible idea, or am I just completely out of or in the woods on this one?
No, you're definitely in the woods there. The BTPU, we've thought about it before, working with some hardware developers. It's funny you asked that question, because it was one of the things that drove me towards Bittensor initially. I think maybe you know this, but I was working building neuromorphic chips, like specific chips, in a past life, and there was no market for those chips. Because if you looked at these large AI companies, they just built their own in-house. There was no place for a company that can invent an ASIC chip to plug themselves directly into a market and be paid for finding some efficiency in the way that they could solve the problems. The Bittensor chip, whatever it is, will have to be uniquely designed to work with the internet. I think that will make it distinct from, say, NVIDIA. And it will be that there's a market arbitrage for people to figure out. I absolutely do think that people will come at this problem from the hardware direction at some point, probably by using standard ASICs for Bittensor. I think that the lower hanging fruit, it comes from purely the machine learning side. No one yet is using gradients on the system. And those gradients could be very easily used to fine tune your model inside of the mixture model. No one's doing that yet. And there's also so many optimizations coming out every day in terms of figuring out how to run larger models on smaller RAM, or hosting them on CPUs, branching uh, the network across multiple devices so that they can service the requests using computers with less power. I think that
Right.
these are the low hanging fruit right now. It's more of like a software layer before we get down to the hardware.
Right.
But
Right.
I might
Yeah.
be
Right.
wrong. But I might be
Well,
completely wrong. It's a black
I was
box.
just thank you for saying that. Of course, anybody can be wrong. But look, I was just thinking, there would need to be many more miners than there are. But that once there is more miners, that it would actually be a very lucrative idea for someone to develop hardware for Bittensor specifically, because if they do a decent job of it, then immediately on it would pretty much make it would be significantly, if they did it right, more advantageous compared to any other general purpose GPU, and so it would be good for them, and then ultimately in the end, of course, it would be good for the miners, and then ultimately it would be best of all, it would be good for Bittensor for being on hardware that is more tailored to it, I suppose. So,
Yeah, yeah.
but maybe not tomorrow, the next day, maybe.
I believe that a technological innovation like that will actually occur um, by people that are selling to BitTensor miners. That's what happened in Bitcoin, for instance. These companies that came up with something like the Ant miner, they mined themselves a little bit, but actually they just sold to miners, and this was the most effective way for them to make money because they could sell to all the miners. They could put the work into building these ASIC chips, and then they could sell to the entire fleet of Bitcoin miners. I think that will probably be how it plays out. Instead of a single miner, becoming a hardware company, it'll be a hardware company takes on the challenge of building a BitTensor miner and then selling those BitTensor miners to people that are directly plugging themselves into the BitTensor market.
Right. Very exciting to be at that point. I just actually, for me, it's just at any point down the line, just imagining what Bittensor might be, or where it would have gone by then. It just is so exciting. There is nothing. I did finally, after so many weeks, do a thorough research of the space, and really what I was looking for is does another Bittensor like network exist? And as far as I found, there is not another decentralized, incentivized neural net. Do you know of any, Const?
No, but I know a lot of companies that are attempting to build APIs for machine intelligence. OpenAI, Cohere is doing the same thing. Even Hugging Face is attempting to jump into this market. The difference is that we're doing it in a decentralized way, in an incentivized way. So like those projects, I think, are the most um, connected, or most like similar to us. On the
Right.
decentralized side, I think the most interesting project is Ginsys, but what they're doing is federated learning. So they're training a single model, and people are doing compute to the single model, so that the weights are shared within inside their ecosystem. I think that's also a very interesting project, and it's even something that we could interface with at Bittensor at some point.
Awesome. All right. So one other thing, you mentioned subnetworks. What are they?
Subnetworks are our first foray into running more than one market and having different types of validators that focus on different types of problems. The long term goal for Bittensor is one embedding to rule them all, multimodal understanding. So it doesn't matter what you put in, you get a representation out, which can be useful for solving any problem that input would depend on. So that's our long term goal. But in the meantime, we want to focus on subdomains so that we can understand them better. So one would be, for instance, image. I think this is one's on the tip of everyone's mind, because of the stability release. This is something we want to push out in the next year. Allow people to do image tasks on Bittensor, so we can do generations, things like this inside the Discord. It'll be really exciting, and people, I think, will love to be able to see what we can create. People believe what they can see. And so subnetworks will allow us to partition the incentive mechanism so that we can have a subsystem with a proportion of the inflation going to that subsystem that has its own validators, and is incentivizing the creation of a new commodity, so maybe intelligence around images, for instance. Later on, because of the way that we've built this new chain, we'll be able to connect those subnetworks. So you could even bridge the incentive mechanism between two networks. You could be in one network, and also be, because you only registered in one, but you're then immediately registered in the higher network as well. You could build even nested incentive mechanisms, and we believe we have a lot of scale, that we can scale we can scale horizontally like that, because right now, like our biggest limitation, our biggest scaling limitation is the 4096 space, because with a certain number of validators, there's effectively an n squared operation in the consensus mechanism, which makes that difficult to run on the chain. But we can multiply the number of networks, so we can go 4096 by 100 or 1000 to get a whole set of networks, or people, thousands and thousands and thousands of miners can come into the Bittensor ecosystem. And the test network itself can be incentivized in Tau, even though maybe not that much. We can really play with expanding the amount of compute that there is in the system. That's another reason why we're pushing towards subnetworks.
Yes. The one thing that maybe I just hadn't thought about so much before Bittensor in life was how this incentivization is such a key part of all this. That I, for example, would not be contributing compute today to this if it wasn't for it, and that it's such a genius part of this plan, and the part that makes me look back at Bitcoin and feel like, oh my God, we've already seen this before. That that part is not being tested here. That it is established that when people have incentive to contribute compute to a system, that it works, as opposed to not having it. Let's see, the subnetworks we talked about. What else? Oh yeah, there was a research paper, and this was a significant thing that you guys just recently released. Was it to a conference? I'm wondering if you can kind of dumb it down a little bit for myself, if not anybody else here, to kind of tell us a little bit about what significant findings there, or if what you guys were able to share with the academic world, which is where a lot of prior development in AI may have happened. Can you tell us a little bit about the paper and what was significant about it, maybe?
Sure. So the original paper that we built everything off from Yuma Rao, we took a lot of that paper, and we re-explained it in that paper, in our new paper, so that people can maybe understand what we're doing from a different angle. It's written by some of our researchers at Bittensor that have a different way of speaking, so maybe it's easier to understand. So that's one aspect. But the work that we've done over the last year was really about fine-tuning the mechanism for evaluating the informational significance of the peers. So in the paper, if you look at the way that the peers are evaluated, what we do is we use a Fisher's information scoring. So Fisher's information scoring is where you learn who's valuable on the validators, and then you look at the entropic difference in terms of the probability distribution of your validator, because a machine learning model that's learned is a probability distribution. You look at how different it is from another probability distribution when a particular miner is removed. So if effectively, if you remove this peer, how much information did you lose when you performed that removal? And that comes out as a Fisher's information scoring. Now, it turns out that scoring is really, really contingent on the specific way in which the validator is built. And at times it leads to a sort of unfairness in the way the weights are set on the chain. because it's very much dependent on what's called the gating layer in the validator. The gating layer is the one that selects the peers, and so if just happenstance, at random, a peer is selected to be the first that is gated in that gating layer, it will get a huge Fisher's information score, even though it's not actually a very accurate scoring. Another reason was that that approximation of information theoretics is based on the assumption that the system is actually converged to what's called the local minima. It means that the network has converged, and that is not necessarily true for many steps in the validator. And so we saw that the weights were not highly accurate. We couldn't make that assumption of the convergence. So what we ended up doing is looking into some statistical techniques that come from the world of finance, called shapely value scoring, where you do that estimation of value, but you do it numerically. So instead of doing it mathematically, calculating the second derivative and second derivative of the validator, which is required for the shapely scoring, which is required for the Fisher's information scoring, you just numerically do it. So you literally just remove a peer numerically to see how much the loss changes, and so that was this improvement in the mechanism of determining a peer's weight. It also allowed us to very easily break up the problem of ranking, so that we could say, okay, cool, what's the individual score of a peer? What's his collective score if you group him with in pairs of 2, in pairs of 3, in pairs of 4, in pairs of n going up. Obviously, it gets exponential in the number of pairs you need to look at when you do that. But we can actually very specifically fine tune between what we would call like a synergy score and an individual score, and do that very accurately on the validator. So that was the main result from the paper. There was also, if you have any questions about that, just cut in. There was also some results there about how we're doing adversarial resistance for peers that are effectively cheating with the data set. So we figured out how to solve that from the validator side. And a lot of this work came from TACO. So a huge shout out to TACO and also Eugene and Isabella, who were our main machine learning engineers that worked on that project and will be there at NIPS to present the paper.
Also, it was basically, am I correct in saying that it was a sharing of the innovation / kind of inventions that you guys had to do because no one's ever done this particular application before?
Oh yeah, we're totally out in left field. We're out in the ocean completely by ourselves, at this point. Like the Bittensor paper itself was quite unique, and now this is like a fine tuning of this new field of machine learning that we're creating, really, which is very exciting, and we hope that there'll be other people in the community, in the academic community, that will be interested in this very specific problem that we have in front of us. It's adversarial machine intelligence in a way that other people are not attempting to solve it. If you look at the literature, if you go to NeurIPS, for instance, right now, you'll see that it's all around gradient poisoning for federated networks, but we're not federated. We're data parallel. So it's a different type of distributed machine learning, and not many people have actually looked at this problem because the entire academic community has essentially had horse blinders on and focusing on the federated aspect, the federated problem in distributed computing. So we're going to be bringing that to NeurIPS, and we're really excited to see what people have to say. Maybe they're going to laugh at us. We've got a lot of laughs over a year, so we'll be expecting that. But I do hope that we get interest from the right people.
Absolutely. Const, I'm wondering, so this might be a bit of a vague question because it's not like there is one kind of AI application or one way to apply AI. But, today the client side is missing from Bittensor, and it's totally understandable why. I'm wondering, how long do you think Bittensor would need to continue to train and continue to grow before, in at least some of its applicability, it would be competitive enough that were someone to be aware that it exists, that they would consider using it for a particular application, whether it's natural language processing or at the time some kind of like a image diffusion application, that sort of a thing. Is that like many years away? Is it a couple of years away? Can you speak to this?
I don't think that it's years and years away before it has value. especially to us, because we're holding the foundation keys that have a fair amount of tau, and we have access to this supercomputer effectively, and we're testing its behavior. Let's I have to be honest, like we are doing effectively machine learning research on top of the ecosystem right now. We have a whole
Right.
team that does this, and that's what we work on. We go, okay, cool, let's test this. Now there's going to be a lot of unknown unknowns. There's going to be a lot of things that we have to fine tune, and that all has to play between the teams. Okay, how do we change the hyperparameters, and how does that affect the clients? The
Sure.
specific architecture that we use, we need to figure out what type of architecture is best suited for Bittensor. Um, you know, I think that in a year from now, if you come back, we'll have some amazing results. I think that in terms of just compute, there should be people that are interested in playing with Bittensor. Whether or not they can really leverage the system because they don't have too much tau, that's
Right.
kind of up in the air. But if they were sitting where I'm sitting with my keys, I think there's so many researchers which would be fascinated to be taking this problem on, given just the expense. It really has come down to, it requires an AI lab out of $1 billion corporation or $250 million worth of funding before you can start to do state of the art. And there's a plethora of people around the globe that don't have access to that. And we think that those people will be interested, even if there's a lot of questions about whether or not they can hit soda today.
Right, right. Yeah, and just what Bittensor has done in which Bittensor just celebrated its first birthday on November 2nd or on November 3rd, but the birthday is November 2nd. What it has, where it has come in 1 year is, would be, to me at least, mind-boggling to anyone who is remotely aware of how long anything has taken to get to where it is, whether it's the GPT series or the stability diffusion or any of these things. It's kind of becomes very obvious that Bittensor is on a different curve of a different, more accelerated curve when it comes to I suppose development of intelligence generally. So very exciting.
Yeah, it's very exciting to be at the intersection of these two fields, and especially right now where supposedly one is out of favor and one's on the way up, and we're like, well, we got feet in both buckets here. It's
Right,
fun.
right. Definitely, definitely, yeah. The DAO, gosh, now that I have more of a sense of what it is, I mean that sounds so exciting. On the one hand, it kind of sounds inevitable in terms of like handing over at some level governance eventually. But on the other hand, I kind of like just want the Bittensor Foundation to remain in actually absolute and complete control of Bittensor just because it is so young.
Yeah.
The idea of anyone else touching it, like I don't know about others, but like I personally don't like that at all right now. But it's probably maybe because it's so young still. I want it to be protected.
Well, I think this come and I agree with you. Uh, I don't think that Bittensor's killer app is decentralized control today. Right now, like lowest hanging fruit is the power of incentives to drive this supercomputer. In the case of
Right.
Bitcoin, reaching that form of decentralization is the most important thing, because Bitcoin needs to be censorship resistant currency. And so it was immediately required that system fell out of the hands of its early control, the early group of people that controlled it. And even in the case of Bitcoin, it took
A
more
long
than a
time.
year. It took more than a year before Satoshi even left the project, and at that point he like took down the network at one point in the first year, and I think that we're still years away from really totally losing control. But it's required. We have to be pointing in the right direction here. And one of the most amazing things about this technology is that it can be community run, and it can be done in such a way that we all have a stake and control of this hyper intelligence network, to make sure that it's aligned with not just a small group of shareholders that are interconnected with a large elite set of players in the world. That it's really bottom up. And
Absolutely.
if the system remains, just Ala and I and other people in the foundation who have full, pseudo control over the chain, that would be a failure of the mission here of building, truly decentralized AI. The DAO, our plan for the DAO is that we get as many people into it as possible, so that we can effectively have a as democratic as possible relationship between what the DAO is and Bittensor.
Yes, yes. I understand where it's going and what the overall mission is. If I've been here 1 month and I feel about Bittensor the way that typically a person would feel about a loved one in terms of worrying about it in different ways that are just ridiculous about a thing, then I can only imagine what that must be like for yourself or for Shib or for many of the people in this room that are day one miners, and they have been there 12 at least 12 times as much time as I've been there. So I constantly just kind of like want Bittensor to be protected. One last question. We have a few minutes here, and I asked this question. I asked Ship this same question, and then I'll just ask it as my closing question from you. What do you see are going to be the most difficult challenges ahead?
The most difficult challenge for us is getting the client side of Bittensor. So and specifically this comes from the foundation right now, to leverage the compute and then make sure that the Synapse team, the people that are fine tuning these hyperparameters, are in communication so that the mechanism is in play. We're doing this meta machine learning, and
Right.
in a way we've made our lives a little bit harder because there's a disconnect between what the community is doing. In a normal machine learning ecosystem, we have full control, we can see everything. There's a black box aspect to Bittensor, and so there's an adversarial
Right.
aspect to Bittensor that's unique in machine learning. So taking what we learn from the client side, from when we're training models on Bittensor, and then injecting that into the proper hyperparameters for the system, so that the network and the community can adapt to it. I think that's really the challenge. That's the only problem that we have. I would say no, it's not true, but it's the core problem of Bittensor is how do we connect this world of incentive with an adversarial black box, and then do machine learning into it. It's the most exciting problem that we have in front of us too. It's the thing that we want to write papers about every day. It's the thing we talk about at length, every morning on our morning calls. I think that exploration into the unknown is what makes Bittensor really exciting for us and makes exciting for everyone in the community. But it also happens to be the most challenging task in front of us.
Absolutely. Gosh, everything about Bittensor is just so groundbreaking. I feel like I'm in the midst of a revolution, really. And I think I would say that's very much justified there. Especially just as a Web3 slash AI interested person, when because I did this for 2-3 months. I intentionally spent time to look at what's out there, and certainly exciting things are happening in the AI world, but definitely by far not one that a person like me could be involved in the way that Bittensor makes it possible. I mean, that opportunity is not there anywhere else in the world, and to contribute to a large neural net and what it makes and where it goes. That's supremely exciting. Const, thank you so much for giving us your hour and telling us more about Bittensor. Is there anything else you want to share with us that I have not touched on today?
No, I think you covered it, but to speak to what you just said there about how we hit this open system allows anybody to come in, that allows us to select for people that really care about AI and the ethics of it. It allows us to select for people that are innovators and gamers, people that know how to beat a system. That's not something that is necessarily selected for by a classic academic trajectory for machine learning engineers. So you said you're happy to be here, and we're happy that you are here, because it's people like yourself that are just genuinely interested, intrigued, excited, and obviously incentivized to be here. You're the ones that are going to make this project a success. That's the killer app we're using here with this open incentivized network. So anyways, thank you, Dr. M. I really appreciate it. I'll be here in 2 weeks probably.
That's right. In a couple of weeks, if somebody wants to have a point of contact with the team and the project, the next good opportunity where you would kind of get a sense of some things, at least within an hour, would be next week, same time, in Bittensor's Discord for the session that actually it's awesome. There's a question and answer session where pretty much anyone can ask any question, and the team will answer this. I don't see anyone doing this anywhere else in the world. So so that's where you can catch up with Bittensor. Const, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you everyone who's here. And we'll see you next or 2 weeks from now, Thursday, same time, same place, and hopefully more exciting things to share. It will be either Shiv or Const, the original co-founders of Bittensor. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day.